the rancher who saved 2 Apache girls, and they came back to love him. The sun was high over the Arizona plains, casting long shadows across the dusty land. The heat shimmered over the earth, and the wind whispered through the dry grass. On the edge of a small canyon, a ranch stood quietly, surrounded by miles of open land. It was a simple place, with wooden fences that had weathered many storms and a small house that smelled faintly of wood smoke and fresh hay. This was the home of Henry Lawson, a man who had spent most of his life here, living quietly and working tirelessly on the land he loved. Henry was a man of quiet strength. In his early 50s, his hair had turned silver, and deep lines on his face told the story of years spent under the harsh sun. He was known in the nearby town as a reliable man, the kind who would help anyone in need but rarely asked for anything in return. Most of his life had been spent alone, with only the ranch and his animals for company. He woke up before dawn every day, tending to the cattle, repairing fences, and making sure everything ran smoothly. Despite his solitary life, there was a gentleness in him that people who knew him well could feel, even if he rarely spoke. That particular afternoon, Henry was walking along the edge of the canyon, checking the water troughs for his cattle. The air was dry and hot, and he could feel the sweat running down his back under his worn cotton shirt. As he moved slowly along the path, he heard something that made him stop. At first he thought it might be the wind rustling the bushes, but then he heard it again, a faint, almost desperate cry. He paused, listening carefully. The sound was small, like the voice of a child calling for help. Henry's heart quickened. He had grown up in these lands, and he knew the sound of animals in distress and the sound of humans. This was human. It was frightened, and it was near. Without hesitation, he began walking toward the sound, moving carefully along the narrow path near the canyon's edge. His boots crunched against the dry earth, and his eyes scanned every rock and bush, looking for any sign of movement. Then he saw them. 2 girls, small and thin, their clothes torn and dirty from travel, were sitting on a large rock. Their eyes were wide with fear, and their faces streaked with dirt and tears. They looked barely old enough to be on their own, and yet here they were, lost in the wilderness. One girl clutched the other's hand tightly, her knuckles white with the force of her grip. Both were trembling, their small frames shaking from exhaustion and fear. Henry approached slowly, holding his hands open to show he meant no harm. "Hey there," he said softly, his voice calm and steady. "You two okay?" The girls froze. Their eyes darted between each other and Henry. The older one, maybe 12, spoke first, her voice shaky. "We were lost," she said. "We don't know where to go." Henry nodded gently. "It's okay," he said. "You're safe now. My name's Henry. Come with me and I'll help you." At first, the girls didn't move. They had been through so much in the last days, running from people they couldn't trust, that even a kind voice felt suspicious. But Henry didn't rush them. He sat a short distance away on a rock, leaving space between them, and pulled out a small canteen of water from his bag. He took a sip himself and then held it out toward them. "Here," he said softly, "drink this. You must be thirsty." The younger girl, probably around 10, hesitated, her lips dry and chapped. But eventually she reached for the canteen and took a tiny sip. The water was cool and sweet, and her eyes widened. She handed it to her sister, who drank more eagerly. Henry watched quietly, letting them take their time. Slowly, the tension in their bodies began to ease. Once they had drunk their fill, Henry spoke again. "Do you remember where you came from?" he asked. "Do you know how you got here?" The older girl shook her head, tears welling in her eyes. We were running," she whispered. "There was trouble. We didn't know where to go. We just kept walking." Henry nodded, understanding without needing all the details. He had heard stories like this before in the town, children separated from their families, caught in situations far too big for them to handle. But he also knew that right now, what mattered most was safety and care. "All right," he said gently. "You don't need to worry about that right now. You're safe with me. Let's get you somewhere cool and you can rest. Then we'll figure everything out together." The girls looked at each other, uncertainty written across their faces. But something in Henry's calm voice and kind eyes made them slowly rise to their feet. He guided them down the path to his ranch, pointing out the cattle and the horses along the way. "Those are the horses," he said. "They're gentle. You'll like them." By the time they reached the ranch, the sun had begun its slow descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Henry led them into the small house, where the air smelled of fresh bread and the faint scent of smoke from the fireplace. He showed them to a spare room where clean sheets and blankets awaited them. The girls hesitated at first, unused to such care, but exhaustion won out. They collapsed onto the bed, their eyes heavy. Henry left them to rest and went to prepare a simple meal, bread, cheese, and fresh milk from his cows. When he returned, he placed the food on the table and smiled warmly. "Eat slowly," he said. "You must be hungry." At first, they ate hesitantly, not sure if it was real or if they were safe. But as the minutes passed, they began to eat more comfortably. Henry watched from a distance, not wanting to intrude but ready to help if needed. There was a quiet peace in the house that evening, broken only by the occasional clatter of dishes and the soft rustle of the wind outside. After dinner, Henry lit a small fire in the living room and gestured for the girls to sit near it. "When I was your age," he began, "I used to explore these lands too. There's a lot of beauty here if you know where to look, and there's safety too if you're careful." The girls listened, captivated by his calm storytelling. For the first time in days, they felt a sense of normalcy, a feeling that the world could be kind again. They asked questions about the animals, the ranch, and the life Henry led. He answered each one with patience, careful not to overwhelm them but eager to share his world. As the night deepened, Henry showed them where they could sleep, tucking them in as best he could. "You're safe here," he whispered. "No one will hurt you." The girls drifted into sleep slowly, the tension in their bodies easing with every passing hour. Outside, the wind continued to whisper through the grass, and the ranch stood quiet under the stars. Henry sat in his chair by the fire, watching over them. He thought about the path that had led them here, their loss, their fear, and now this fragile trust that had begun to grow. He knew the journey ahead would not be easy, but he also knew that sometimes a single act of kindness could change a life forever. That night, under the wide Arizona sky, a bond began to form. Two frightened girls, lost in the wilderness, had found safety in the quiet strength of a man who had lived his life quietly and alone. And for Henry, a man who had spent decades in solitude, a new chapter was beginning. One that would bring challenges, joys, and a connection that neither he nor the girls could have imagined. The next morning the sun rose over the ranch, warm and golden, spilling light across the land. The girls woke slowly, feeling the comfort of a safe place. Henry was already outside, tending to the horses, his movements calm and methodical. He noticed them watching him from the doorway and waved gently. "Good morning," he said with a small smile. "How did you sleep?" The older girl nodded shyly. "Better than before," she admitted. "That's good," Henry said. "There's breakfast ready and then I'll show you around the ranch. You'll meet the cows, the horses, and even the chickens. You'll like it here." And so, life on the ranch began for the two girls. It was a life far different from the fear and uncertainty they had known, filled instead with quiet routines, small joys, and the gentle guidance of a man who had become their protector. Little did they know, this was only the beginning of a story that would test their courage, their hearts, and the bonds of trust and love that had begun to grow on that quiet ranch under the vast Arizona sky. The first days on the ranch were full of quiet wonder for the two girls. Everything around them felt so different from the fear and uncertainty they had known. The wide-open fields, the smell of earth after the morning dew, the soft lowing of cows, and the gentle neighing of horses. It all seemed like a dream. Henry guided them patiently, showing them how to move carefully around the animals, how to approach the horses without startling them, and how to respect the cattle that wandered near the fence. At first, the girls were cautious. Their eyes darted around constantly, scanning for danger, and their hands clutched each other tightly. The older one, whose name was Ayanna, was protective of her younger sister Lita. She watched every movement, ready to react if needed, though deep inside she felt a growing sense of safety that was both foreign and comforting. Henry noticed their caution and never pushed them. He knew trust could not be forced. Instead, he offered gentle guidance, simple words, and the assurance of his presence. "See that mare over there," Henry said one morning, pointing to a chestnut horse with a white blaze across her forehead. "Her name is Daisy. She's calm and friendly. If you approach her slowly and speak softly, she'll let you pet her." Yana took a hesitant step forward. Daisy's large, brown eyes watched her carefully. She lowered her head slightly as Yana reached out, her fingers trembling. When her hand finally touched the horse's soft muzzle, a tiny smile broke across her face. Lita, seeing her sister's courage, followed suit. For the first time in days, they laughed together, the sound like music floating across the field. Henry smiled quietly, watching the moment. This was the beginning of trust, the first step in showing the girls that the world could be kind. Life on the ranch followed a gentle rhythm, dictated by the sun and the needs of the animals. Mornings were for feeding and watering, afternoons for chores like mending fences or gathering eggs, and evenings for quiet reflection by the fire. Henry taught them how to collect water from the well, how to sweep the floors, and even how to churn butter from the fresh milk of his cows. Each task was a small lesson in patience, care, and responsibility, but it was also a way for the girls to feel useful, to feel like they belonged somewhere. At mealtimes, Henry encouraged conversation, asking them about their memories, their dreams, and the little things that made them happy. The girls spoke hesitantly at first, but gradually stories began to emerge. Yana spoke of her favorite stories her mother used to tell, of nights spent under the stars listening to the wind. Lita spoke of small adventures she had dreamed about, of running freely through open fields. Henry listened attentively, never interrupting, never judging, simply letting their voices fill the quiet house. Despite the calm, there were moments when the past seemed to reach out, reminding the girls of their fears. A sudden loud noise, the cracking of a branch, a hawk's cry would make them flinch. Sometimes they would wake in the middle of the night, eyes wide with terror, whispering about shadows and people who weren't there. Each time Henry would sit by their bedside, offering a reassuring hand on their shoulder. "It's all right," he would say softly. "You're safe here. Nothing will hurt you, not while I'm around." These words became a kind of anchor, a steady reassurance in a world that had felt so unstable. Slowly, the girls began to relax, letting down the walls they had built to protect themselves. They started to explore the ranch on their own, venturing a little farther each day, returning with stories of small discoveries. A nest of baby birds hidden in the brush, a patch of wildflowers near the creek, or the playful antics of a young calf. Each new experience was a small triumph, a way of reclaiming the joy that life had once held. Henry also introduced them to the rhythms of nature. He taught them to watch the sky for signs of changing weather, to recognize the tracks of animals in the dirt, and to understand the delicate balance that kept the land alive. The girls were fascinated by his knowledge, asking endless questions and listening with rapt attention. They began to see the ranch not just as a place of safety, but as a living, breathing world that they were a part of. One afternoon, Henry took them to the canyon where he had first found them. The girls looked around at the wide expanse, the rocky cliffs, and the shimmering heat waves. "This place can be dangerous if you don't pay attention," Henry said, "but it can also be beautiful. You have to learn to respect it." Yana and Lita nodded, taking in the view. The canyon no longer felt frightening. It felt like a place of possibility. They picked up small stones and examined the plants growing stubbornly between rocks, marveling at the resilience of life. Henry watched them with quiet pride, realizing that their curiosity and courage were slowly growing, nurtured by the safety and care he provided. The local community, at first cautious, began to notice the girls as well. Some were wary, unsure of the circumstances that had brought them to the ranch. But Henry's consistent kindness and the girls' obvious happiness gradually won them over. A neighbor might stop by with fresh bread or vegetables, and the girls would greet them shyly at first, then with growing confidence. The ranch was no longer an isolated world. It was slowly becoming a small, safe part of the larger community. Despite these moments of calm, Henry knew that challenges lay ahead. He understood that the girls' past experiences could resurface at any moment, that fear could return like a sudden storm. But he remained patient, focusing on small victories, on moments of joy, on the bond that was forming between them. He treated each day as an opportunity to teach, to guide, and to care, not just for the girls but for the young hearts that were learning to trust again. Evenings became a time for storytelling and quiet reflection. Henry would light the fire in the living room, and the girls would sit close, listening as he spoke of his own childhood, of lessons learned on the land, and of the animals that had taught him patience and humility. They laughed at his stories, sometimes cried with him at the hardships he had faced, and always left with a sense of warmth that filled the quiet house. In these moments, the girls began to see Henry not just as a protector, but as a guide, a teacher, and eventually, a friend. They shared their dreams, their fears, and their small triumphs, finding comfort in the steady presence of a man who never demanded anything but offered everything. For Henry, this was a gift he had not expected. His life had been solitary, filled with routine and quiet work, but now it was alive with the laughter, curiosity, and trust of two young girls who had come to rely on him. The bond between them grew stronger with each passing day. The girls started calling him Uncle Henry, a name that carried both respect and affection. They looked to him for guidance, and he, in turn, treated them with a gentle firmness, setting boundaries that taught them respect while always keeping their well-being at heart. This balance of care and structure created a safe environment where they could heal and grow, and the change in them was visible to anyone who watched. One day, as they worked together in the garden, Yana asked softly, "Uncle Henry, will we ever have to leave?" Henry paused, considering his words carefully. "I don't know what the future holds," he said honestly, "but while you're here, this is your home. You're safe and you're loved. That's what matters." The girls nodded, feeling the truth of his words. For the first time in a long while, they felt the possibility of permanence, the hope that life could be stable and kind. They began to explore their own talents and interests. Lita discovered a love for drawing, often sketching animals or scenes from the ranch, while Ayana showed a natural skill with the horses, learning to ride confidently and care for them with patience and understanding. Henry encouraged them both, celebrating their successes and gently guiding them through their mistakes. Months passed, and the ranch became a place of learning, growth, and healing. The girls' laughter became a constant presence, blending with the sounds of the animals and the whispering wind. Henry found himself changing too. The solitude he had once cherished became less important than the connection he now had with Ayana and Lita. Life had given him a new purpose, a new sense of fulfillment that went beyond the quiet work of the land. As the seasons shifted, bringing cooler winds and golden sunsets, the girls had transformed. They were stronger, more confident, and more trusting than they had been when Henry first found them. And though the world outside the ranch remained uncertain, within its boundaries, a sense of safety, love, and belonging had taken root. a bond that would guide them through whatever challenges lay ahead. In these months, simple routines became rituals of comfort. Morning chores, afternoon lessons, and evening stories were no longer just tasks. They were the threads of a life being carefully woven together. Through patience, kindness, and steady guidance, Henry had shown the girls that the world could be a place of hope and security, that trust could be rebuilt, and that love could grow in even the most unexpected places. The ranch was no longer just a home for Henry. It had become a sanctuary for Yana and Lita, a place where fear and uncertainty slowly gave way to curiosity, courage, and joy. And in the quiet moments, when the girls played among the animals or watched the sun dip below the horizon, Henry would catch their smiles and know that, despite the challenges of the past, the future held the promise of healing, growth, and enduring love. Life on the ranch had become a rhythm that felt natural and comforting to Ayanna, Lita, and Henry. The days passed with laughter, chores, and quiet moments by the fire. The girls had grown more confident with each passing week, exploring the open fields, caring for the animals, and learning the skills Henry had patiently taught them. The bond between them had grown stronger than any of them could have imagined. Henry felt a quiet pride whenever he saw the girls ride the horses or tend to the garden, their small hands steady and sure. He had given them safety, guidance, and a sense of belonging, and they had responded with trust, affection, and courage. Yet life outside the ranch was never far away. While the girls were safe within the fences and walls, the wider world could not be ignored. The town and nearby communities, once cautious, had grown curious about the two girls who lived in isolation on Henry's ranch. Rumors began to spread as people whispered about their parents and about the circumstances that had led them to the ranch. Henry had always believed in honesty and integrity, but he also knew that some truths could bring complications. One morning, while Henry was repairing a fence, a vehicle drove slowly up the dirt road leading to the ranch. A few figures stepped out, polite but firm, carrying documents and looking around with serious expressions. Yana and Lita had been playing near the creek and they froze when they saw the strangers. There was a heaviness in the air, a sense that something important was about to happen. Henry approached them calmly. "Good morning," he said, keeping his voice steady. "Can I help you?" One of the visitors, a woman with kind eyes but a serious tone, introduced herself. "We're here on official matters," she said. "We need to speak with the children. There are relatives who are concerned for their safety, and we need to ensure they are being cared for properly." Yana's face went pale, and Lita clutched her sister's hand tightly. The thought of leaving the ranch, of being taken away from the man who had become their protector, filled them with fear. Henry put a hand on their shoulders, giving them a sense of security. "Everything here is fine," he said. "They're safe, well-fed, and learning. You're welcome to stay and see for yourself." The visitors exchanged a glance and agreed to look around. They observed the daily routines, saw the girls riding horses, helping with chores, and even laughing together during mealtime. Henry answered their questions patiently, explaining how he had found the girls and how he had cared for them. He did not hide anything, but he also did not allow panic or fear to enter the conversation. Despite the reassurance, the officials explained that, due to legal requirements and the girls' family history, they could not simply leave the girls in Henry's care indefinitely. There were distant relatives who had the right to be informed, and the process would take time. Henry understood. He had always believed in doing what was right, even when it caused heartache. He could not simply defy the law, but he also could not bear the thought of the girls being removed without their understanding or consent. That evening, after the visitors had left, Gianna sat quietly by the fire, her eyes full of worry. Lita snuggled close to her sister, sensing her unease. "Are we going to have to leave?" Gianna asked softly, her voice trembling. Henry sat down beside them, placing a comforting arm around both girls. "I don't know exactly what will happen," he said honestly. "But I promise you this, no matter what, I will do everything I can to make sure you are safe and treated with care, and I will not stop caring about you." The girls nodded, but the fear did not leave them entirely. Over the next few days, the tension on the ranch grew. Henry continued his routines, but there was an unspoken awareness that life might soon change. The girls clung to their daily activities with a mixture of hope and anxiety, finding comfort in the familiar while bracing for the unknown. One afternoon, as Henry and the girls worked in the garden, a letter arrived from the authorities. Henry opened it carefully, reading the words aloud so the girls could hear. It explained that, after reviewing the case, the girls would need to stay temporarily with a relative while official matters were finalized. Henry felt a pang in his heart, but he did not show despair. He knew that breaking down would only increase the girls' fear. Instead, he focused on preparing them for the change, giving them tools to cope with the upcoming transition. Over the next days, Henry spent extra time with Ayanna and Lita, teaching them more about the animals, showing them how to care for the garden, and sharing stories of resilience and courage. He wanted them to understand that, even in difficult times, they had the strength to face challenges and the ability to carry the lessons they had learned on the ranch wherever they went. The day of departure arrived, and the air was thick with emotion. Ayanna and Lita had packed small belongings in simple bags, their hearts heavy with the thought of leaving the only home they had known. Henry helped them gather their things, offering calm words and a steady presence. "Remember," he said, "this isn't the end. No matter where you go, the bond we have will stay. You are strong and you are loved." The girls clung to him, tears streaming down their faces. Henry hugged them tightly, feeling the weight of the moment, knowing that separation was unavoidable but also believing that the connection they had formed would endure. "Be brave," he whispered, "and always remember who you are." As the vehicle pulled away, the ranch seemed quieter than ever. Henry watched until it disappeared over the horizon, the girls' small forms fading into the distance. For a long time he stood there, the wind rustling through the fields, thinking about the journey ahead for them and for himself. Despite the pain of separation, he knew he had given them something invaluable: safety, trust, and love. In the weeks that followed, Henry returned to his routines, tending to the animals, repairing fences, and caring for the land. Yet, the absence of the girls left a void that could not be filled by work alone. He often found himself thinking of Ayanna and Lita, wondering how they were adjusting, how they were coping, and whether they still remembered the quiet lessons of the ranch. Every small sound, the cry of a hawk, the neigh of a horse, or the rustle of leaves, reminded him of them. Meanwhile, Ayanna and Lita faced their own challenges. The relative's home was safe, and they were treated well, but it was not their home. The routines were different, the space smaller, and the freedom they had known on the ranch was limited. At night they would talk quietly, holding hands and remembering the lessons Henry had taught them, the calm patience, the gentle care, and the courage to face the world. These memories became their anchor, giving them strength and resilience as they navigated the unfamiliar environment. The separation tested their spirits, but it also reinforced the bond they shared with Henry. Letters were exchanged, visits arranged when possible, and each encounter reminded them that love and care could transcend distance. The girls carried the wisdom they had gained on the ranch like a shield, helping them to face fears and challenges with courage. Months passed, and the bond between them and Henry remained unbroken. Though miles apart, they stayed connected through letters filled with drawings, stories, and words of gratitude. Henry wrote back patiently, offering advice, encouragement, and reminders of their strength. The girls would often read his letters aloud to each other, feeling the warmth of his words and the reassurance of his presence, even from afar. During this period, Henry also reflected deeply on the nature of love, responsibility, and human connection. He realized that sometimes, doing what was right required patience, courage, and trust in the hearts of those we care about. The girls had taught him as much as he had taught them. Their resilience, their curiosity, and their capacity to trust despite past trauma had inspired him to see life differently, not as a solitary path of work and routine, but as a journey enriched by love, compassion, and connection. The seasons changed, and the ranch began to feel the touch of autumn. Leaves turned golden, the air grew crisp, and the sun dipped earlier into the horizon. Henry continued his work, tending to the animals and the land, but always with the thought of the girls in his mind. He knew that life was preparing them all for the next chapter, a chapter that would bring challenges, yes, but also the promise of reunion and renewed bonds. Through it all, the girls learned to carry the lessons of the ranch in their hearts. They learned patience, resilience, and the value of love in its simplest, purest form. They remembered Henry's words, his calm guidance, and the feeling of safety he had provided. And though they faced moments of fear and uncertainty, they drew strength from the memories of the ranch, the open fields, the gentle animals, and the man who had given them a home when the world had seemed so cruel. By the time the first snow dusted the distant hills, Ayanna and Lita had grown stronger, wiser, and more confident. And Henry, watching the sun set over his quiet ranch, knew that this separation, though painful, was not the end. It was a test of endurance, love, and trust, a test that all three of them would pass. And deep in his heart, he held the hope that one day they would return. Years passed slowly, and the seasons continued their quiet rhythm over the Arizona plains. The ranch remained the same in many ways, its wooden fences weathered by sun and wind, the horses grazing calmly in the fields, and the house filled with the familiar smells of fresh hay and bread. But for Henry, time had a weight that was different now. The ranch had once been a place of solitude, of quiet work and long days alone. After Ayanna and Lita had left, the silence had returned, but it was heavier than before. The absence of their laughter, their questions, and even their small mischiefs made the days longer and the nights quieter. Yet, Henry never stopped hoping. He wrote letters when he could, sending advice, encouragement, and reminders of the lessons they had learned together. Sometimes, when the wind rustled through the trees or a hawk circled overhead, he would imagine them running freely, smiling, and happy. The bond they had formed was unbreakable, even across the distance and years. And he believed, deep in his heart, that one day they would return. For Ayanna and Lita, life outside the ranch had been challenging but full of learning. They grew into teenagers, strong, independent, and resilient. Though they had been separated from Henry, they carried his teachings with them in everything they did. Lita, now 16, had developed a talent for drawing and painting, often capturing scenes from the ranch in her sketches, Daisy the horse, the fields of golden grass, and even Henry himself, quietly working near the barn. Ayanna, 17, had grown confident in riding and caring for animals, skills she had learned from Henry that no one else could teach so well. But despite their growth and accomplishments, a piece of their hearts remained at the ranch. They remembered the nights by the fire, the warmth of Henry's stories, the taste of fresh milk and bread, and the feeling of safety they had known there. Every letter they received from Henry reminded them of the love that had been given freely, without conditions, and the hope that they could return someday. Finally, the day came when circumstances allowed them to return. Their relatives, recognizing the deep bond and the positive influence Henry had had on their lives, arranged for a visit to the ranch. The girls, now taller, stronger, and full of confidence, could hardly contain their excitement and nerves as they traveled down the familiar dirt road. Their hands gripped each other's tightly, as if grounding themselves in the reality of what was about to happen. Henry was tending to the horses when he saw them appear in the distance. At first, he thought it might be a trick of the sunlight, but as they drew closer, his heart leapt. There they were, Yana and Lita, no longer small, frightened children, but young women carrying the strength, courage, and love that had always been within them. He dropped the reins of the horse he had been leading and ran toward them, his arms open wide. The girls hesitated for only a moment before breaking into a run. Tears streamed down their faces as they threw themselves into Henry's arms. The reunion was filled with sobs, laughter, and whispers of "I missed you" that carried across the fields. Henry held them tightly, his own eyes misting, feeling a joy he had not imagined in all the lonely years since their departure. The ranch, once quiet and empty, was alive again with the sound of love and connection. After the initial embrace, they sat together under the wide Arizona sky, holding hands and sharing their stories. Iana and Lita spoke of the years apart, of the lessons they had learned, the challenges they had faced, and the ways in which Henry's guidance had shaped them. They showed him their drawings, their accomplishments, and even their small triumphs in daily life, proud of the people they had become. Henry listened, proud and moved, realizing that the love and patience he had given them had grown into something beautiful and enduring. In the following days, life returned to the ranch in a new rhythm. The girls helped with chores, just as they had years before, but now with the skill, confidence, and independence that only time and experience could bring. They rode the horses, tended to the garden, and cared for the animals with a sense of ownership and pride. But it was not the same routine as before. There was a deeper connection now, a shared understanding that they were not just living on the ranch, but actively shaping their lives and strengthening their bond with Henry. Evenings became a time of reflection and celebration. They would gather by the fire, sharing stories, laughter, and memories. Henry told them of the quiet years he had spent waiting, of how he had imagined their return countless times. The girls, in turn, shared their journeys, their hopes, and the ways in which they had grown. Each story, each shared moment, reinforced the love and trust that had never truly been broken. The local community, too, noticed the change. Neighbors and friends who had once been cautious were now filled with admiration for the way Henry had nurtured the girls. Some would stop by to bring gifts or fresh produce, sharing in the joy of the reunion. The girls, once shy and reserved, now greeted them with confidence and warmth, demonstrating not only their personal growth, but also the power of care, trust, and compassion in shaping human lives. One afternoon, Ayana and Lita sat with Henry on a hill overlooking the ranch. The sun was low, casting long shadows and painting the fields in shades of gold. "Uncle Henry," Yana said softly, "we never forgot you. You saved us when no one else could, and you gave us a home, even when the world was harsh." Lita nodded, adding, "We learned so much from you, how to be strong, how to care, and how to trust. We're here because of you." Henry's heart swelled with emotion. "And I am so proud of both of you," he said, his voice steady but full of feeling. "You've grown into strong, brave, and kind young women. Seeing you here, safe and happy, is the greatest reward I could ever imagine." The girls smiled, their eyes shining with gratitude. In that moment, under the vast Arizona sky, the past hardships, the long months of separation, and the uncertainties of life seemed to fade away. All that remained was love, pure, enduring, and unbreakable. Over the following weeks, Ayana and Lita stayed on the ranch, fully reintegrated into its rhythms and routines. They taught Henry new things too, ideas, stories, and perspectives from the wider world that they had experienced during their time apart. Together they worked, laughed, and explored, creating a life that was richer, fuller, and more vibrant than ever before. One day, as they rode the horses across the open fields, Ayana turned to Lita and whispered, "We're home." Lita nodded, her face glowing with happiness. They were not just physically back on the ranch. They were back in the place of safety, love, and belonging that Henry had created for them years ago. Henry watched them from a distance, his heart full. He understood that the true measure of his life was not in the work he had done on the land, but in the love and care he had given to these two girls. He had saved them from fear and uncertainty, but in return, they had given him something equally precious: the joy of family, the warmth of trust, and the fulfillment that comes from seeing those we care about thrive. As the sun set, casting a warm golden glow over the ranch, Henry, Yana, and Lita sat together on the porch. The horses grazed peacefully nearby, the wind rustled gently through the trees, and the world seemed calm and perfect in its simplicity. They spoke softly, sharing hopes for the future, dreams yet to be realized, and the knowledge that whatever came next, they would face it together. The years of struggle, separation, and fear had given way to a new chapter, one of love, connection, and enduring bonds. The ranch was no longer just a place of work or solitude. It had become a symbol of resilience, compassion, and the power of human kindness. And for Henry, the two girls who had once been lost and afraid were now a living testament to the impact of care, patience, and unwavering love. As night fell, the three of them sat together, watching the stars appear one by one. The quiet of the desert was no longer lonely. It was filled with the presence of family, of shared memories, and of hearts connected across time and trials. Gianna and Lita leaned against Henry, and he wrapped his arms around them, feeling the warmth and strength of the bond they shared. In that moment, the story came full circle. The rancher who had once been a quiet, solitary man had become a father figure, a protector, and a friend. The girls who had been lost and afraid had returned, bringing with them gratitude, love, and a reminder that family is not only defined by blood, but by the care, trust, and devotion we show to one another. And so, under the vast, star-filled Arizona sky, the ranch stood as it always had, steady, enduring, and filled with life. But now it was alive in a way that went beyond animals and land. It was alive with love, with bonds that had been tested and strengthened, and with the knowledge that the greatest gift one can give or receive is the unwavering presence of the heart. The rancher and the two girls he had saved had all come full circle. Together they had faced fear, loss, and uncertainty, and they had emerged stronger, bound not just by circumstance but by love. And in that bond they had found something timeless, something that no distance, no challenge, and no passage of time could ever take away.